Let's see, the next point the textbook describes is assertiveness. What is assertiveness? Well, textbook describes it as a willingness to stand up for your rights, essentially, but with respect to the rights of others. Sometimes people who are assertive get mislabeled, let's put it that way. Being assertive does not mean being rude. Sometimes people are rude and they say they're assertive. Well, no, they're just being rude. Rude is when you don't listen to the other side. Rude is when you disregard your conversational companion. Assertive is just basically you telling people what you want, straightforward and being, direct. But then you give other people the same exact right. So a truly assertive people say what they want to say, but they also allow other people to say the same, they give them the same rights. They give them the same ability to express themselves as freely as they want to. And a rude person, on the other hand, does not. So they want to say what they want to say, but they want you to shut up and go away. See, that's not assertive, that's rude. That's the difference. So some messages that we hear are very assertive. They tell you straightforward what they want. It differs, again, culturally. I think some people just are more predisposed, their character perhaps is to be more assertive, to state things exactly as they are, and other people are more indirect, so they're less assertive. So what are some of the suggestions that the textbook gives us for being more assertive? There are a lot of times when you have to be assertive. In fact, when you're not assertive, a lot of times in this culture, in the West, you will not succeed. Being non-assertive, not going to get you anything. You're going to sit around and wait for something to happen. It's not going to happen to you. You're going to have to go after it. You're going to have to ask for it. Nobody's going to come to you and give it to you until you indicate that you need it, you want it, you're going after it. So things like that. So there are some suggestions that the textbook gives us for being assertive. And one of them is to describe a problem. Tell people how you feel things are. If you have a problem, if you see a problem, don't just say, oh, it's not a big deal. Say, this is how I see this situation. I'm seeing this problem, I'm seeing this issue, this is how it appears to me. And it may not be correct, it may not be appropriate, it may not be right. You may actually be wrong about it. Just because you see something or feel something a certain way doesn't make it so. But at least people know how you feel, right? Because you told them. If you didn't tell them, they would have no idea. State how this particular problem affects you. Once you say, okay, I have a problem, say, okay, this is how this problem is bothering me. This is what's affecting me about this particular issue. And then you propose solutions that work it out. So this is my problem, this is how it affects me, and I think I should resolve it. And how can I possibly resolve it? Well, these are some of the ways in which I can resolve it. If you don't propose a solution, then all you're doing is complaining, right? Everybody can complain. When people come with complaints, they usually say, okay, so what would you like to be done? How would you like to solve your complaint? That's usually my response to people. How would you like to fix it? And they say, I don't know. I said, well, then I can't fix it. Why are you complaining to me? Do you want me to do something about it? This is where that assertiveness has to come in. It's like, okay, you want this problem fixed? What do you want? Well, how do you want it fixed? And then a lot of times confirming the understanding, you have to say, all right, do you understand what I mean? Do you get it? Does this make sense to you or not? If you don't do that, is it because you're afraid that a person is not getting you, not understanding you, or not being clear, not being precise, or not getting through? So sometimes people do not ever confirm that they're actually have even been heard. People come, they complain, and they drop it. Like once they voice their complaint, that's it. That they stop right there. So that's not being assertive. That's not being assertive enough to actually get the result. Why would you want to be assertive? Because you actually want to work out the problem. So that's the idea. So that's assertiveness. Now we're to the next objective. I told you that in the second part of the class we will talk about disconfirmation and confirmation. And then we'll talk a little bit about some cultural identity issues that go along with that. Now this is a little bit of a fancy, more scientific language of, creating these terms that have special meaning. Because if I say confirmation, disconfirmation, most of us do not talk like that in real life. What was the last time you heard the word disconfirmation? You're never going to hear it, unless you read it in the textbook or something like that. These are technical terms that people who study communication use, and other areas as well. And so what is confirmation and disconfirmation? Let's talk about it just for a little bit. Disconfirmation is when you ignore somebody, okay? I'm talking to you and you don't respond, as if I'm not there, as if I don't exist. You just basically deny me the courtesy of response to me. You're like, you know what, I don't care. I don't hear it, it's not important, I'm not going to answer it. I'm not going to pay attention to it, done. Confirmation is the opposite. Confirmation is when you acknowledge the presence of another person, you recognize them, you indicate your acceptance, you say, I hear you, I understand you, okay? And you respect that person on the terms that they define themselves on, their self-definition, and then your relationship is defined or viewed by this person. So like how you see your relationship, you basically say, I hear you, I understand you, and I understand the standing that we have with each other, essentially. So at least you're acknowledging. Now you don't have to agree, don't get this wrong. Confirmation doesn't mean agreement. Confirmation means acknowledgement, okay? You can still disagree in both of those situations. Only in disconfirmation, you're not even acknowledging a person. Or in confirmation, you're at least acknowledging a person, but you may still disagree. So, there is disagreement, or as we call rejection. That's not the same thing. So when a person is being rejected, or their views are being rejected, or their opinions are being rejected, or what they're saying is being rejected, they're still being recognized. They may be recognized, but their views or opinions are being rejected because the person is unwilling to discuss those issues. Just doesn't want to get into it. It's not that you don't exist, it's just I don't want to talk about it. It's not something I want to get into right now. So these are different things. And so these are very precise terms that are used in communication theory, and they actually stand for much bigger ideas over here. But there's a lot of disconfirmation that happens in our society and globally in the whole world as well. But remember, this textbook is written from a perspective of a Western world. And so most of the issues that this textbook discusses as far as communication goes really come from the Western world and stay within the Western world. So if that's not where you are, you still have to kind of pick into that area. Now you've seen this little chart right here. This is the isms of disconfirmation. These are very common things that happen in our society. And so the textbook actually offers us 4 different aspects of disconfirmation. You have the racism, okay? You have the ageism, sexism, and heterosexism. I personally don't divide sexism and heterosexism. I don't think that people should, get sort of say their own category just because, they have a non-traditional way or how everybody sees it as far as their sexuality goes. To me, sexism is sexism. You could basically treat people unfairly based on their gender or based on their perceived gender or desired gender or whatever they want to be, essentially. You could be just unfair to them in a sexist way. So I would split it into 3 categories. The textbook does into 4. That's the prerogative of the writers of this textbook. That's what they do. But let's talk about a more common thing, and then we move to those other categories. Racism. What is racism? What do you guys think racism is? Give me some feedback. Come on, don't tell me you don't know what that word means. In your own words.
Like divide the person who has a color.
A color, okay. Or a lack of color, too. Because racism can go in any way. Racism could go in any direction. A person whose pigmentation of the skin or belonging to a particular ethnicity, it's not even pigmentation of the skin, and you mistreat them, right? That's what we're talking about. Is that racism? You guys realize that racism is not just towards black people, you know. It could be black, it could be white, it could be Asian, right? It could be very racist. People can be very racist. You can look at somebody and say, oh, they look this way, but then they get mistreated. You know, gypsies, for example. Gypsies get mistreated in every country in the world I know. You ever heard of them? You ever heard of gypsies? People of Roma? Every country they live in, they get mistreated. That's racist, essentially, if you want to think about it. It's racist. It's, you know, who they are. It's okay. So it's not always like, you know, black or white or anything like that. It's much, much bigger than that. But, you know, racism or racist speech is a type of a communication that puts down or minimizes, marginalizes a person or a group because of her or his belonging to a particular group of people. Now, I'll tell you personally, I don't buy the whole race thing. You know, to me, it's a very artificial category that people create. Racist, to me, is absolutely an artificial category that people made up. I think we look different. I think we're biologically different. That we do have biological differences. And we look the way we look because of what our parents look like. So it's something that we inherit from our parents. But what people do is they give meaning to a race. What they say, the way he looks means something. See, to me, that's the worst part about racism. If he looks black, that means he is like this, like that, like that, like that. Stereotypical stuff, right? If he looks Asian, that means he's this, and that. Automatically assuming. You know that your looks have nothing to do with who you really are. What you are like, your character, your abilities have nothing to do with your looks. It's not the look. It's not your hereditary descent. Now, yeah, of course there are limitations and there are tendencies that run in different, you know, people groups. But still, you know, giving meaning to somebody's pigmentation of skin. Pigmentation of skin does not mean anything, is what I'm trying to say. Because underneath, we're all the same people. You know, if you get sick and you're in a hospital and you need a kidney and we happen to be of the same blood group, I can give you my kidney. Even some people would say, oh, wait a minute, you can't do that? He's of a different race. He doesn't look anything like you. You know what? Doesn't matter, because on the inside, we are the same. Identical. We can swap parts, you know? You can't swap parts between a car and a boat, right? But you can swap parts between a car and a car. Right? See what I mean? So we're in the same category. And the minor differences are like the makes and models, you know? But the principle of how we operate, we function is the same. We're more the same than different. What the difference is completely external. Just the packaging, let's put it that way. We're more alike. So we're compatible. It doesn't really matter what race, quote unquote, you come from. We're all compatible. And so people make a big deal about it. And I think sometimes people make too big of a deal about it. And the more deal we make about it, the further we make this problem worse, unfortunately. But for the purposes of this class, I want you to recognize that we do have a problem with this as a society, as a people, as a world, and in our speech, that problem is reflected. There's individual racism, and then there's institutional racism. Now, what is the difference between individual racism and institutional racism? What do you guys think? What is a racist institution, for example? Can you give an example of an institution that's racist? Or what institution could be racist?
Long time ago, the black people were servants.
Yeah, slaves, yeah.
Yes,
All right, so what does that make in America?
Back in the day, black people couldn't vote.
Couldn't vote. Thank you. That's a more specific. So if we look at voting as a right of a citizen, you live in this country, you contribute, you help it, you know, you're born here, but then you can't vote. Why? Why can't you vote? Because you look different. That's institutional racism. In this case, governmental racism. The government says, you're different, your vote, we don't want it. See what I mean? That is a great example of institutional racism. That happens, you know, still happens in the world, but there are sometimes organizations and groups that will not admit a person as a member because of the way they look. The packaging doesn't work, okay? They simply will not admit it. So that's institutional racism. It still exists. You know, churches can do that sometimes. Churches can become so ethnic that they won't let somebody else of another ethnicity join because they're not that ethnicity. It's a problem. It's a problem. It can happen. And individual racism, of course, is how a person treats other people on a personal level, you know, person to person. So institution is more about big, you know, big structures, groups of people, okay? And that's the difference. So here's some obvious suggestions for avoiding racist speech. This is what the authors of the textbook give us. They said avoid using derogatory terms for members of a particular race. I don't know if you know even all of the derogatory terms for members of a particular race, because I realize that for you guys, English is not your native language, so you may not be sensitive enough to even know that there's some words that are called derogatory. They're considered inappropriate to refer to another person by. Some of these you might know, some of these you might not know. But that is a general advice. You know, there's some words that simply you should not call people with because they're considered offensive. Avoid basing your interactions with members of other races on stereotypes. So if you meet a person who belongs to a people group because of the way they look, obviously, you automatically assume, because you have a stereotype in your mind, right? The stereotype that a lot of people have is that, you know, all Asians are great at math, right? So if you meet an Asian, like, hey, can you help me out with my math? They're automatically just like saying, hey, can you help me out with my math? I'm like, I'm not any better than you in math. I'm not like Superman or anything like that. I'm just like you. I just study hard. Yeah, I just spend more time studying. And so it's unfair. But, you know, like, person can get offended by that. You know, like, you know, why are you saying that about me? That's not, you know, I'm actually terrible at math or something like that. So it could be positive, it could be a negative thing. You meet somebody, you know, they're black and you're like, oh man, you can teach me basketball. And they're like, I don't know how to play basketball. You just assume, just because he's black, he's gonna be good at basketball. You know, like, no, not necessarily. You know, things like that. We make these crazy images of people based on the way they look. We assume that they belong to this group, and everything that this group has, that person has. And so that's stereotyping. And so if we avoid stereotypical references in language, that will most likely, gain us a better understanding. So avoid mentioning race when it is irrelevant. As I said, I believe race is an artificial category. I don't really think it matters, because I think we're more alike than different. I think we all want the same things from life. Yes, our culture is maybe different, but as far as the pigmentation of our skin or anything like that, it really doesn't have anything to do with it. I think our culture is a bigger divide than the way we look. Because somebody who is Asian, who's born in America, is going to be very different from an Asian born in Asia. They're culturally divided. Ethnically, as far as the way they look, they're identical. Can't tell a difference. But how they think, what they feel, how they believe they should live their life could be completely different. So you see, that's what I mean. So avoid bringing that into a conversation just because of the way a person looks. Will save you a lot of trouble. Avoid attributing individuals' economic or social problems to race of the individuals. Well, that's a very common thing here in the West, where people just basically blame people for things, and it's usually a group that is being blamed for certain things. It's a socioeconomic issue that just gets worked out. So it's a good thing to avoid that altogether. All right, heterosexist speech, and everything that can be said of heterosexist speech would be very much true of a sexist speech as well. Our society where we live, the Western world in which we live, is a traditional society, and it was built on this patriarchal idea. It's built on the Judeo-Christian principles. Okay, like America essentially is a country that is built on Judeo-Christian principles. It's built on a Bible, it's built on beliefs. It doesn't mean that most people who live here actually believe it. But that one was built on as a foundation. So as a result, we have certain presuppositions and values that we as a culture, as a people, as a nation have accepted and have historically accepted it. All of our founding documents, all of our laws, everything is written in a way that really prefers the traditional way of looking at life kind of through the Bible, okay? Whether people recognize it or not, it's just how it is. People follow the 10 Commandments without even knowing them, okay? They do it because that's how society kind of flows. Everybody says stealing is wrong. Who says it's wrong? Well, everybody knows it's wrong. Well, why? Why can't I just steal everything I want? Well, people do it intuitively without even realizing or believing it. They don't have to believe in the 10 Commandments. They'll still believe that stealing is wrong. They'll believe that lying is wrong. They'll believe that cheating is wrong. All these different things, and that's the idea. So when we come to like this whole idea of discussing heterosexual speech, and that basically means speech that is focused on the traditional gender roles. Okay, that's what that is meant. And, so what is the opposite of heterosexual? Just to make sure you guys understand the terminology. What is the opposite of heterosexual? Give me that. If you guys don't get it, what I'm going to say next is going to make no sense at all. What is the opposite of heterosexual? Look it up if you must.
Understand the meaning of terms, but I don't know the exact word.
So if a person says, I am heterosexual, what are they saying?
Homosexual.
That means that they prefer different gender.
Yeah.
Okay? If I say I'm heterosexual, that means in a sexual relationship, I prefer a woman. That's what I'm saying. What is the opposite of that? If I say I'm not heterosexual, what am I saying? I am a Homosexual, that means I prefer the same gender in a relationship. So if I said that I was homosexual, that means I would prefer a man, right? So that's what I want you to understand. So heterosexism is a way, of basically being attracted to the opposite gender. And our society and our world, the whole entire Western society, has traditionally been built on that as being the norm, okay? Today, a lot of people say that's not the norm. The writers of this textbook will tell you it's not the norm. You don't have to accept that as a preposition, okay? But you have to recognize that that is a part of the world in which we live. A lot of people consider relationships that are not different genders, that are same genders, to be just as normal as every other relationship. That's the difference, is what I'm trying to say. That's why I minimize this idea, and I basically put it with sexism, of generally speaking, treating people because of their gender or because of their orientation. I don't really care if you prefer men or women. I don't care if you are a man or a woman. I should treat you as a human being, regardless of what you like or don't like, or regardless of whether you were born with male organs or female organs, right? I should treat you as a human being, not conditioned based on, who you are or who you want to be or anything like that. I should treat you decent regardless, right? So this is this whole idea about heterosexual speech. The idea is that we have a lot of insensitivity in our society right now towards people who say they're homosexuals, okay? They express themselves that way. A lot of people are intolerant towards them. That means they treat them mean. They disregard them. They dismiss them. They speak all sorts of terrible things about them. And so that is not consistent, actually, with the overall values. Just like we don't want to speak negatively about somebody who is a different color, we shouldn't be allowed to speak negatively of somebody who's of a different gender, or negatively of somebody who prefers a different gender. That should be the same thing. That's why we're putting this in the same category. So, and the same thing as with racism, this could be on an individual level where you just say, hey, I don't like those people. Or it can be on an institutional level where you basically say these people are not allowed. So, the same rules apply, and the same solutions exist for it. Now, let's talk about another aspect, ageism. What is ageism? This is another form of discrimination. It's another form of mistreatment. Ageism is what?
Or not respect to older people.
Okay, not respecting the older people, right. So ageism, it's not the issue of just respecting or not respecting, it's treating differently, okay? I know that in the society you come from, you are taught to respect elders, right? Well, that is a value that is cultural, right? If you see somebody disrespecting an elder, you're just like, that's just wrong. But if you're imagining now a society that doesn't have that value, where we all consider people equal, respecting meaning treating you the same way as I would treat a 90-year-old, and a 90-year-old expecting you to treat respectfully and not talk down to you, right? So what we're talking about is equal treatment rather than preferential treatment, or disrespect, as in putting down or minimizing, speaking badly about and using disparaging language or something like that. So ageism is basically when you show disregard or disrespect against a person just because they are old. Just because. That's the only reason. So, imagine you're a business owner and you're hiring a new person. Let's say you run a software company and you need this new computer game tested, and you're hiring computer game testers. And in walks in a 90-year-old kid to apply for the job of computer testing, and in walks in a 75-year-old dude, okay, to apply for the same job. A lot of people would give it to a 19-year-old kid because they're like, oh, he knows about gaming. What does a 75-year-old dude know about computer games? He's probably never played one in his life. Assumption. Treating him differently just because of his age. You're saying he's old. Old people don't do those kinds of things. He wouldn't know anything about computer games. Well, for all you know, that guy has been programming games his entire life. You don't know that, but you're going to treat him differently because you assume that old people are not good with computers and certainly don't really know anything about computer games. So that would be acting out ageism. Basically discriminating against the person just because they're old. Things like that. Now sometimes being old does mean something. You know, our health breaks down when we're old. You know, people get older, they can't do things physically as much as a young person, you know. Yeah, sometimes you do have to think about it, and that's realistic, but that's physical limitations. We do the same things with, we look at a person. You know, if I'm hiring somebody to clean out my yard, and a guy comes in and he's like 400 pounds, and he can barely walk. He's walking, and he can't breathe, and he's losing his breath, and I'm like, you're gonna work in my backyard? I think you're gonna drop and die. You're gonna pass out. You're too big, you're too heavy, you're not healthy. You're not in the physical condition to do this. Where another guy comes in and he's strong and healthy and it's like, okay, that guy's gonna be okay. You know, sometimes we do judge these physical abilities, but what I'm talking about is not being a good judge of what's right or what's appropriate and inappropriate. I'm talking about discriminating a person only because where they qualify, they're okay in every other way, except that disqualifies them. So, something like that. You know, a person shows up to fix your, you have a leaky pipe in your house, and a person shows up, and you call the plumber, and that plumber is a woman. You're like, oh no, you're not fixing my pipes. You're a woman. Women don't know anything about being plumbers. That's being sexist. That's another aspect of sort of say discrimination. You can discriminate between genders in the same way. Just because a person is of one gender, you say they can't do that, or they can't do that just like everybody else. They're not good at these kinds of things. And so you assign a category, a role to this particular a person, and you say, okay, you can or you cannot do that. So these types of discriminatory behaviors essentially have to do with us limiting people and saying, because you are this, you are not good at that. Or because you're this, you are also that. That's the unfair part. That's the discriminatory part. We're making judgments about people because of the way they look, or because of how old they are, or because whatever their preference is, you know, whether it be sexual or something else. It's just, you can discriminate based on religion too, you know. People get discriminated because you are this, you're treated this way. That we have lots of isms beyond that, but these are the big ones in our society, so they get highlighted in our book. All right, and in all of these aspects, we have individual and more of an institutional ways in which we sometimes mistreat people. Okay, you recognize that. So, for example, here's a poster of women protesting for equal pay. This has been one of the hot issues in the United States, where women holding the same job as a man will get paid less. Same job. Because you're a woman, you get paid less.
No.
Even now, yes. Same job, because you're a woman, you get paid less. Not fair, right? Because the end is, did you get the job done, right? You got the job done, you got paid. Who cares if a man or a woman did that job? The job was done, right? From a business perspective, it shouldn't make any difference. Yet it does. And the reason why it does is because traditionally, men would go out and work and women would stay at home. So when women started working more and more, people start paying them less because they're saying, oh, her husband is working. They're okay. She'll make it because her husband is working too. Things like that. And that shouldn't affect how much a person gets paid. But that is the society we come from. Our roots is where the husband went out and worked and the wife stayed at home. So if the wife goes out to work, she's just making extra money. She's not actually making all the money for the family. She's just adding to whatever. So you could pay her less. That's the thinking. Very wrong thinking, by the way, but nevertheless, that's how people think. I'll tell you this, I know cases right now. I know right now women who are getting paid less just because they're women. Just because. Not fair, absolutely not fair, but it happens. And so people, of course, pushing for laws to make that illegal, but a lot of times laws do not solve problems. What solves problems is people's conscience. Okay, if people are not ethical, if they don't have conscience, then they'll still break those laws. Let's put it that way. They'll still do what they want to do. So these issues are a big deal, and in our communication, these are pitfalls a lot of times. This is where we create a lot of trouble, a lot of miscommunication, a lot of bad communication that turns out to be to our detriment. What we say ends up hurting somebody. What we say ends up pushing somebody, alienating somebody away from us, not bringing them closer. And our relationships get affected because of what we say. If we practice these types of speech, behaviors, then essentially we push people away. And that's what we want to try to avoid in a world where we need to communicate better. All right, so we're still talking about disconfirmation and confirmation. Obviously, you understand that that's disconfirmation we've been talking about. There are certain cultural identifiers that the textbook highlights for us. We're being asked to examine the preferred cultural identifiers that we can use in talking, and then to include rather to exclude. A lot of times when you speak to people, like I said in the beginning of this class, the level to which you understand the person you're speaking to is how successful you're going to be in communicating. The more you understand the person you are addressing, the more you understand the person you're talking to, the more you will get through, right? The more you will connect with them. So this is where knowing where the person belongs, knowing the group that they fit into, knowing kind of who they really are, and a lot of times that is very cultural, will set you up for success. And then once you know where people are, once you've figured out this is where they fit in, even if you did that in a very loose, generic kind of way, the idea is to include rather to exclude. Use a language that speaks about, inviting that person in because regardless of their difference, rather than excluding that person out because of their difference, things like that. So like, for example, you would notice all the time, because I know where you come from and I know your culture. A lot of times I speak about this textbook and I keep saying, this is a textbook written for a Western culture, and I want you to think about it this way, because when I'm speaking about communication, it's a perspective. I realize that communication in the East is different. It's not the same. And so I'm trying to be inclusive of you by recognizing your cultural identity, by recognizing your belonging, and by telling you that I recognize it, and I know that not everything in this textbook makes sense to you or applies to you, because the world you come from is a different world. So rather than excluding you and saying, well, this is just how things are, get on with it. I'm actually trying to include you by saying, I know this is not how things are in your world, but in this world, this is how they are, and I want you to know about them, because it will help you succeed in this world, as long as you're here, living in the Western world. So you see that I utilize this particular technique in class all the time, even with you guys. The idea of including rather than excluding. And that is how you are able to communicate more successfully with people who are not like you, who are different. You recognize where they are, and you find a way to bring them in rather than push them out and say, okay, you're different, so just stay out. You see what I mean? It's like, no, you're different. Let's find a way for you to participate too. let's find a way for you to also be a part of this. Yeah, this is one of the American values, believe it or not, is inclusivism is actually very, very American. All right. So the cultural identifiers for a lot of people in the United States, especially, is race and nationality. So this is one of our cultural identifiers. When you talk about people, you learn about them, you figure them out. Like I said, race is kind of very subjective, because the way you look doesn't really tell people who they really are. But where you come from, belonging, can be a very big part of your identity. The question is for you to figure out whether that's a big part of a person's identity or not. Sometimes it matters, sometimes it doesn't matter. So somebody who is, African American or black, sometimes for them that's a big deal. For others, it's not a big deal. They're like, okay, so what? I'm black, big deal. It doesn't change me. I'm still who I am, and so different people have different level of identification with the traditional culture, let's say, that they come from, perhaps. Some people do not fit in to their traditional culture that they're part of, and you have to figure that out. Some things you might say to them will be deeply offensive, and either way, whether you assume they fit in too much into their culture or too little. So those are issues. Also, things like religious belonging is a big deal as well. So we have quite a big diversity in America, and even in this school, you guys have experienced the diversity that's quite big, right? I mean, you probably met people on campus from all sorts of places, and that's actually cool. That's what makes this place really neat. Let's see. Now, let's talk next about the principles of using verbal messages effectively. This particular section explains to you a little bit about why the language can distort the thinking that we have. So, there is a tendency that we have as a people is to extensionalize people. So let's see, how can I explain this in a simple way? I'm trying to think. We tend to view people as objects. We tend to depersonalize sometimes people, okay? We put labels on them. It's very unfair. We don't see them as individuals, is what I'm trying to say. We just see, all Asians are this, fill in the blank, whatever people say about Asians, that's it. That may not be true. But see, what that does is it kills the individuality of a person who identifies themselves as an Asian. All blacks are this. And so we tend to not treat people as individuals, and that's a problem. So the extensional orientation is really the opposite. You look first at the person, and then you figure out, how they might fit into whatever perceived category that they might fit into. You look at, what a person looks like. You see whatever parts of personality that you can perceive about them, and then you work backwards. So rather than assuming that they are this, you're letting that sort of develop naturally. They may be and they may not be. They may be, this black guy you meet may be typical of a lot of other black guys, or maybe not typical at all. He may be from Africa, and Africans are completely different from, African Americans. Absolutely different completely. Look the same, culture, heaven and earth, total difference. Don't think the same way, don't believe the same ways, don't live life the same ways, don't have the same values. It's a lot of times Africans don't feel comfortable around African Americans, even though they look the same. They don't feel comfortable. Why? Because they actually have an entirely different culture. So, you know, this is a way of kind of working at this backwards, or not backwards, but this is a better way of working at it. Looking at the person, figuring out their personality, and then seeing how and where they fit in. Rather than looking at the person, figuring out where they fit in, putting a label, and then maybe starting to see them as an individual. So these are just different ways of approaching, sort of say, personal identity. So one of the suggestions that the textbook gives, and this is a really good suggestion, is to avoid allness. Allness. By allness we mean all of these people, fill in the blank, whoever I'm talking about, are like this. It's avoid thinking about people fitting into this all, box of all, okay? And so this is what the textbook suggests. They say that you may think that you know all there is to know about certain individuals, but you don't know everything. So don't assume that this is how this person is, because all other people whom I know who fit into that same category are like that. Therefore, that's how that person is. Just don't assume that. So a useful device that can help you to avoid allness is to end each statement with an etc. That's a rhetorical device that people use by creating a possibility of other, sort of say, extensions. Every statement that you're making essentially is a little bit incomplete. Don't complete your statements. Don't state things as facts. You can infer things, but be very careful about inferences. And certainly never use inferences as facts, because a lot of times we don't know enough about an individual. So be very cautious about pronouncing things about people without truly knowing them. Now, in interpersonal communication, in intercultural communication, this is a very valuable tool that has to do with this generalization, people treating people as all, you know, avoiding allness. It's a technique. You must learn how to distinguish between the facts and inferences, and avoid that confusion. We've talked a little bit about facts and inferences already, and we have a clear understanding what is a fact and what is not a fact, right? How do you tell the difference between a fact and an inference? What's the difference? How do you quick, easy way to tell a fact from an inference? Come on, guys, we already talked about it before. What's an easy way? Just think outside the box. It has nothing to do with this slide. Don't worry about the slide. What's an easy way of telling a fact from inference? No, not necessarily. But that is a solution. All right. I'm going to make two statements about myself. I'm wearing a gray jacket. Second statement is, I like denim. Which one was a fact, which one is an inference?
First one's the fact.
So I wear a gray jacket is a fact. Why? How do you know it's a fact?
I can see.
You can see it, so you've verified it. I like denim. Is that a fact?
It's not giving it.
It's an inference. You think I like denim, but can you verify it? Even if I was wearing that, you still don't know. I may not like wearing it. It's a guess, right? You're hoping, you're thinking, maybe, but you don't know unless I tell you, right? Unless I specifically said that. So, you know, things like that. A truth that is verifiable is a fact. A truth that is not verifiable, a lot of times is an inference. Now, some truths are not easy to verify. Doesn't make them untrue, okay? They're just not easily verifiable. Or they're very hard or sometimes even impossible to verify, right? But that doesn't make them not true. Don't confuse the, fact inference confusion is, again, it can be a very slippery slope, but sometimes in language we make a lot of inferences, we make a lot of statements that are facts, sometimes we make statements that are inferences, and a lot of times people cannot distinguish between the two. What is a fact that can be verified and what is my opinion, okay? A fact that can be verified is that you guys have signed up for this class and you're here. And my inference is that you guys are gonna pass. It's not a fact, right? Because it can still happen that you don't pass. It's an inference. I have a faith, I trust, I believe, I hope, that you will pass. But the idea is that it's still not a fact until you actually did and you got your final grade. Then it will be a verifiable fact. Things like that. We confuse these things a lot of times, and when we do that in speech, it creates confusion. Because you believe something that you're told when it's actually not a fact, when it's actually an inference. I don't know it, I can't know it, there's no way for me to know it, yet I'm gonna state it as if I do, and you're gonna believe me. And that's not true. So we do this in speech about other people, about other cultures, about other religions, and things like that. So be wary of the fact inference confusion. That is definitely an issue. Indiscrimination is also a practice that's harmful. It's a form of stereotyping in which you focus on similarities within a group rather than individual differences. So where you're basically saying, again, this is that oldness idea where all these people are like that, they're all the same, therefore they're the same. That person likes this, that person likes this, that person likes this, therefore they're all alike. Well, wait a minute. That is one thing that binds them. They all like this, but they're all very different. You guys are signed up for the same classes altogether. That binds you together into one category. I could start assuming all sorts of things about you, but that may not be true at all. That one similarity that you have doesn't mean you have other similarities. That wouldn't be right. So sometimes these things that, being indiscriminate, just kind of assuming that things fall into the same routine or same general category is unfair. So the solution is to use indexing or an index by looking at things individually rather than as groups. Polarization of the aspect that is harmful. Polarization is saying you're either this or that. Either you are that or you're this. Like you have to be this or you have to be this. It's called polarization, some people call it bifurcation, there's all binary, assignment. There are all sorts of terms for this problem that we have. But we say, you're either black or you're white. Some things are in the middle. It's either truth or a lie. Some truth is not complete truth, and some lie is not all 100% lie. And so sometimes we do this. So we polarize. We have a tendency of painting the world in this kind of black and white, good or bad, positive, negative, healthy or sick, brilliant, stupid, rich, poor, and so on and so forth. This is called polarization. In reality, that's not how it actually works. But in language, that is how it works. And that creates a faulty perception. That creates a way of speaking. If that is how you speak, you will create faulty perceptions in people. All right? So let me give you an example. Somebody who makes $500,000 a year, would you consider that person rich or poor? Rich, $500,000 a year is pretty rich, right? Just for me, I would also consider that, a rich person. I don't make that, so I'm like, okay, that's rich, right? So, but that person walks into a room of people who all make $100 million a year. What do you think he's there then? He's poor. It's all relative. It's all relative. We make these categorizations based on our feeling, our understanding, our circumstances, which may not be true, in the room next door. Because he walks into a different room, all of a sudden, he's not rich. All of a sudden, he's poor because all these guys make way more money than he does. That's it. So polarization is something we use in a speech, and it can be very problematic. Very problematic. Static evaluation. We should avoid static evaluation. What is static evaluation? It's basically where we retain a judgment or opinion of a person despite of whatever changes in that person. So, for example, I had a student who came in, and in their first year of school, that student was really lazy. Try to get out of every kind of assignment, every type of homework. So my tendency would be to say, that's a bad student. He's lazy, doesn't do his homework, he wants to get away with anything, he just wants to get grades for doing nothing. So that would be me having a static evaluation. And the problem is that I don't give that person a room to change. Because next year he comes back, his life changed, things changed, circumstances changed, all of a sudden, he starts being a good student. And I don't give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm like, oh, that he didn't do that homework. He copied it from somewhere. I don't believe him, I don't trust him. Why? Because I made an opinion about him that is static. It's stuck. He's stuck in the bad student club, in my mind, right? Unfair, because he changed. But I didn't give him the ability to change. I didn't allow in my mind a possibility that he can improve, that he can change. Always believe that people can change. Don't assign a static condition. Once a bad student, always a bad student. Not true. Not true. So, same thing. Static evaluation of people is a form of bigotry. It's a form of us being really unfair to people. So you kind of have to see people's progress. All right, so we're down to the end now. Let me summarize. We talked about several things in our communication. We talked about how messages are meanings that are really within individuals. Everyone has their own individual meaning, and that's what makes our communication kind of difficult to decipher. You have to be able to read people, understand who they are, truly, if you want to understand what they mean. We talked about the denotative and connotative meanings. Okay, those are big deals. Those are the words I want you to know. I want you to be able to know those definitions. We talked about abstraction, right? The more abstract you are, the less people will understand you. The less abstract you are, the more people understand you. So be as precise as you can be if you want to be understood. If you don't want to be understood, be as abstract as you want to be. All right, we talked about the different variances in politeness. And obviously, some people are more direct, some people are indirect. What is polite, what is impolite? Obviously, we use speech, that indicates our politeness, but, sometimes directness or indirectness is attached to this idea. So being anonymous versus anonymous, signing your name or not signing your name, obviously being, in online communication, we talked about the pros and cons and benefits and detriments of that. And then we also talked about assertiveness. Remember, assertiveness. What does it mean to be assertive, and how does that really work out in life? Is that good? Is that bad? That's another topic, important topic that we touched. In the disconfirmation section, we talked about ignoring people versus recognizing them in communication versus drawing them in. So accepting or rejecting, supporting or not supporting them in our communication. And then, of course, we talked about the tendencies towards racism and heterosexism and ageism and all these sexism, all these different discriminatory behaviors that we engage in as a society, as a people, sometimes institutionally, sometimes on a personal level. How that is certainly not helpful in communication, and how we have to be very careful in avoiding that, because that certainly creates a breakdown in our communication. So we've been given some really good advices of avoiding projecting the orientation, avoiding the allness idea, and don't go for the inferences, stay with the facts, and do not be indiscriminate. Do understand that things sometimes need to be evaluated and reevaluated. Don't polarize by saying good or bad, rich or poor, and don't hold on to static evaluation.